Welcome everybody to this virtual bird walk through Hardberger Park. Thank you all for coming. This is a wonderful turnout. First, a little bit about Patsy and me and birding in Phil Hardberger Park. We started participating in a survey of the park with Georgina Schwartz even before the park opened and are continuing that today. I was instrumental in creating a bird water feature on the Blanco entrance side of the park in 2015. More recently, Patsy and a small group of folks created the Alamo area Master Naturalist Wildscape Demonstration Garden on the Northwest Military side. And we led the annual Oak Loop Trail bird walks for several years until COVID. And we are continuing that today in virtual format. Anyway, we're in the park a lot. We usually have binoculars. We tried to gear our annual walks that we led toward people who are new to birding. Today will be no different. I'll start our presentation talking briefly about birding tools, books, binoculars, apps. I'll spend most of my time talking about a birding database called eBird. I'll also mention something called iNaturalist. I will then turn it over to Patsy for the main event, which is photographs and information about birds that you might see in Phil Hardberger Park. First, a little housekeeping. We'll refer to a lot of resources today. All of them will be available in a PDF resource page that you will be able to get from Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy website in a couple of days. Patsy will show it at the end also. One of those resources is a link to the Phil Hardberger list of birds that have been reported on eBird. Okay, the first thing that you need to get the most out of birding is a good pair of binoculars. In the resource document, there is a link to an excellent guide to selecting binoculars for birding. It was prepared by Patsy and Tom Kinglet, two local birders who many of you may well know. Binoculars need to be properly adjusted for your eyes. In the resource document, there's a link to an excellent Outdoor Life magazine article that describes how to properly adjust binoculars. Finally, binoculars are useful only if you can find the bird in your field of vision. Now, the way to do this is to get on the bird, as we say, is to look out and see where the bird is, keep your eye on the bird or where you think it is, and then bring the binoculars up to your eyes. You'll then see the bird. If you try to bring the binoculars up to your eyes first and then look for it, you will most likely be very frustrated. Okay. The second thing every birder needs is at least one bird identification guide. There are many field guides available in book form. I started using the Sibley field guide when I moved to Texas and found that my trusty Peterson guide did not include all of the South Texas specialties. But there's no one best book for everybody. I suggest you talk to other birders and look at their guides and make a decision based on that and their comments. Now, I mostly use apps now, but I find a book still useful on walks when I want to share a picture. I find that easier to do than a handheld device. And also when I'm looking through similar birds, I find it easier to use a book to flip between different birds. Okay, like apps, there's a wide variety. Like books, there are a wide variety of apps available for both Apple and Android. I'd like to suggest 3 of them that are pretty good and free. The National Audubon Society provides the Audubon Bird Guide app. Cornell Lab of Ornithology provides an app called Merlin. Merlin also includes a feature that identifies birds by sound. BirdNet is another app. It identifies birds just by sound. These three apps are all shown on the resources document. I don't have a good ear for music, so sound IDs are very helpful to me. The sound ID feature on Merlin is easier to use, and it does not require connection to the net in the field. I find the BirdNet app a bit more clunky. However, it has access to more birds because it requires the user to be connected to the net in the field. So that's the trade-off. Now, just one caveat, apps are not perfect in identifying things by sound. For instance, the Merlin app usually gets the black-crested titmouse correct. However, on our last bird survey last week, Merlin called it a greater yellowlegs. So some judgment is required when using these apps. If you want additional features, there are a bunch of other bird identification apps that you can buy. And just like books, I suggest you look at apps that other people are using, talk to them about it, and then decide what you'd like to purchase. Now, one final thing about apps, playing sounds on apps loud enough for birds to hear adds to their stress. And it is against Phil Hardberger Park policy to do so. If you must listen to bird sounds in the field, please either use earbuds or turn the volume way down and bring the phone up to your ear. Okay, now I'm going to share screen and talk about eBird. eBird is a very useful worldwide database that is the result of individuals like us contributing checklists of what birds we see and how many of each. It has become a very useful tool for scientific research. You can get started by going to ebird.org and signing up. It's free, it's easy, and the website has an excellent help section. That's interesting. The view that I have has, I had to move something so I could get to the arrow to move it. There we go. This is a typical checklist that I entered. One way to submit a checklist is by keeping a paper list, and then when you get back to access to the website, you enter the birds and the number of each on that website. Now, I find it easier to enter the data directly using my phone and their free app. You don't have to be connected in the field to do that. You just make the list, and then when you get back and have access to the net, you can submit the information. From this screen, which you can access for any checklist that was submitted by either method, you can do things like adding photographs or sounds or more detailed comment on any particular bird. Once you have started entering data, then it organizes it for you in a variety of ways. You can keep track of your birding experiences by year, by place, etc. Every checklist you've ever submitted is there, so you can take a stroll down memory lane. Now, if you've got a lot of people entering data like this, data quality is of critical importance. And the way eBird handles that is through local experts that review sightings that are rare at a particular location or time of year, and then notify the user. I was birding in my sister's backyard in Phoenix once and submitted a black-chinned sparrow instead of the much more common black-throated sparrow, which was right below it on the list. I corrected that error after I got this nice call from the local expert who explained that black-chinned sparrow would be really quite rare, especially in a residential setting. Now, the flip side of submitting data is that you can use data with more than a billion observations. There's a huge amount of information on the website. I use primarily 4 features. The first is a birding hotspot. If I'm going to a place that I haven't birded before, I'll look at the birding hotspots for that area. This is a screen capture of the birding hotspots in San Antonio. The Mitchell Lake is shown in red, indicating more than 300 species. There's several good spots here, as you know, with sightings of more than 250 species. And on the website, you can zoom into each of these to get more accurate location information. The next thing that I use is the bar chart. This gives me some indication of what I might expect to see. This is a part of the bar chart for Phil Hardberger Park. And on this, you can see that this time of year, you'd expect to see a couple of different doves, but you wouldn't expect to see a chimney swift. The next thing I use is the species map. This shows sightings, the most recent in orange, older ones in blue. And so when and this is for a rufous hummingbird this time last year, there were a lot of sightings. If I see something that is a bit rare and I'm doubtful about whether it really is here, I can go to here, look at this, and if I see a bunch of red spots indicating it's been seen within the last month, I can feel more confident that the species I've selected is the correct one. The final feature that I use in eBird is the rare bird alert. It comes out daily. This is for a yellow-throated warbler, the first yellow-throated warbler seen in Phil Hardberger Park. There's usually, there's only one here, but there's usually more. And on here, this alert tells you where it is. This line takes you to a Google map. You can also go to the actual checklist on what the rare bird was reported. In this case, most of the birds on that checklist were seen at the Birdwater feature, but not the rare bird. The rare bird was seen in the trees closer to the parking lot from the Birdwater feature. So that information was added here as well as a photograph. Okay, that concludes my part of my discussion of eBird. One more item that I'd like to talk about is another database called iNaturalist. I use iNaturalist a lot to identify plants using photographs. Plants don't fit about like birds. And you really do need photographs to use iNaturalist effectively. I identify a lot more birds than I actually get a photograph of. So I don't submit a lot of birds to eBird. To iNaturalist, a lot of them eBird. The one time I think iNaturalist is helpful in birding is when you happen to get a photograph of a bird, but you're not sure of the identification. In that case, you might get additional feedback from more people sooner than you would from the one reviewer for eBird. Now, iNaturalist is used in a lot of scientific studies now, more and more. Another reason for submitting a bird photographs to iNaturalist is to improve that database for those studies. Okay, that concludes my part of the presentation. Patsy will now share photographs and talk about some birds of Phil Hardberger Park.
Okay, I'm thinking everybody can hear and see me now, so I'll get started. We're glad that everybody's here and from a variety of different places. That's wonderful. But we'll move now into what I call the birdie part of the program. And first, before I actually get started, I'd like to thank the photographers who have given me permission to use their photos. I've taken many of the photos myself, but other people have some very good photos and they've let me use them. So that's a real bonus for this program. If you're new to birding, a real key to getting started in birding is your observational skills. You'll probably quickly find that looking for movement in the trees or around in the environment is the best way to get your eye on a bird, to actually spot a bird. And then once you spot the bird, you'll want to start noticing characteristics of the birds that you see, such as where is it and what is it doing? How large is the bird? How is it shaped? What kind of habits do you find that it has? What color is it? What patterns does it have on it? And what sounds does it make? A lot of people go immediately to the color, but there are many other things to take a look at as you're trying to identify a bird. The color doesn't always tell the story. So oftentimes for really new birders, it's best to start talking about birds in terms of where you might see them. So I'm going to do this program in terms of what we might see flying overhead, what we might see in the tops of trees, etc., and what's on the ground and what's in the shrubs. And so we'll go through a good number of birds here. And I'm going to start with the ones that are let's see, just a second. I'm going to do something here. Okay, we're going to start with the ones that we see in the sky. All right, Sandhill Cranes. Here's a group of Sandhill Cranes that were flying over in migration over Hardberger Park. These birds are flying from left to right, and the long part of the body is on the right-hand side, and that includes the long neck and the head. And then on the left, at the rear, you're going to see the tail and the extended legs. And now, if it's hard for you to see these in this photo, which I'm assuming for most of us it would be, that just means that we need binoculars. This is a really good example of why a good pair of binoculars is going to help you identifying birds. So during migration, we see groups of well over 100 Sandhill Cranes together, flying together above Hardberger Park. And just so you see what a Sandhill Crane looks like close up, I'm including this photos to give you some idea of how they look. I took this photo last winter in the hill country while we were passing a cattle feed lot between Willow City and Highway 281. And I got to say, that is not where I expected to see a Sandhill Crane. But by golly, there they were. There were a group of them, and they were eating something out of the mud there in where the cattle were. Here's a group of 4 of a much larger group of 200 white pelicans. So in April of 2021, several birders, including Alan, saw a group of 200 pelicans fly over the Blanco entrance side of Phil Hardberger Park. They flew low enough for birders to make the call that they were white pelicans because they were all white birds with black along the trailing end of the wings. That's basically pretty much the only thing that they could be. And you can see kind of with their head, they hold their head like pelicans do there. Once again, that's going to be easier to see with binoculars. So 2021 was the first year for a documented sighting of American white pelicans in Hardberger Park. There's really not their usual habitat in the park. So a flyover is what you're how you're going to see them if you see them at all. Gray-tailed grackles. They're sometimes known locally as the HEB bird because they gather in large raucous groups of 100 or more, often for the night, near big parking lots. And HEB has big parking lots, generally speaking, and thus the HEB bird nickname. They also forage on pastures or lawns in great groups. The males, like we're looking at here, are black with a long tail, and the females are a dark brown with a buff-colored throat and a noticeably shorter tail than the males. And because the sexes look so different, observers often think that they are two different species of birds, but they are not. And here are some cedar waxwings eating white mistletoe berries. They often eat berries. Many times you see them in hackberries, but there are other kinds of berries that they eat too. And this was the first time I had noticed them eating mistletoe berries. We see cedar waxwings in large groups in the winter as they breed in the spring and summer in the northern half of the United States and well into Canada. They have an easily recognized high-pitched sound that they make, often while they're flying. And it's very difficult to repeat that sound, but it's very high-pitched, higher than I'm going to be able to do here. But they go, see, 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 see. And oftentimes, if you're outside, you hear them before you see them. So if you see that sound, which some people call a sighing whistle, I don't quite get that one, but that's often what's called. Take a look up and see what you can see. It might be a group of cedar waxwings. Now here's a group of black vultures flying above. You could not tell they were black vultures, once again, unless you had binoculars. But I'm going to show these vultures up close. This is a vulture, a black vulture that I found near the Oakmont alongside the Savannah area last year, working on an old deer carcass. The two vulture species that we have here are the black vulture, that's this one, and the turkey vulture. When you look at them, if they're sitting on the ground, the difference that you see is that the head of the black vulture is a dark gray, not black, but dark, dark gray. And the head of the turkey vulture is red. They're about the same length, both being just over 2 feet long. So it's a good sized bird. Now here's a black vulture flying. And when they're up in the air, you can tell it's a black vulture because of this white tip at the end of its tail. And if you look at a turkey vulture, you'll be able to see white on the trailing edge of the wing. And that makes it a little bit easier to figure out what kind they are. Sometimes you can't get a good enough view of them. And there are some other characteristics. The turkey vulture flies with its wings kind of in a dihedral, I don't know how to do that, like this, instead of flatter. And they fly kind of tippy, a little like they're correcting all the time. The black vultures don't do that as much, but the turkey vultures kind of do this flip, it's like they're correcting their angle somehow all the time. If they do that, that is likely to be a turkey vulture. The two species of vultures are often seen soaring or roosting in mixed groups. Near Hardberger Park, we frequently see vultures roosting atop the high overhead lights on Wurtzbach Parkway. And I don't know if you've seen that, but that happens a lot of times early in the morning if you go down the parkway. And in the park and in this whole area in general, we see a lot more black vultures than we do turkey vultures. Most people call the vultures the cleanup crew because they eat dead animals, often roadkill, and they prevent carrion, dead animals, from remaining in place long enough to spread disease. So disease prevention is very important to all of us. It's really good for the public health that we have vultures in our area. And here are a couple of crested caracaras. Here's one up here, and we're looking at the backside of the other one there. A lot of people know them as the Mexican eagle. You sometimes see them flying overhead at Hardberger Park. You know, about 30 years or so ago, you had to go down to the valley far in South Texas to see them, but their range has been moving steadily to the north for some time now. We've had them in San Antonio for a while. We've even seen juvenile crested caras in the park, So that means it's likely that they're nesting here. And that's a good thing. That's good for it just says that our park is healthy enough to support nesting. When seen from below, they look like they have a white head and a white tail. So they're sometimes mistaken for bald eagles. But we don't typically see bald eagles here. Their range is increasing and it's coming closer to us almost every year. And someday I think we'll probably see bald eagles more routinely here in San Antonio, but it's a very, very, very uncommon sighting to see a bald eagle in San Antonio. So if the head is white from underneath and the tail is white from underneath, you're going to have to think it's probably a caracara. Just like vultures, the caracara eat carrion, and sometimes you'll see across a carrion eating along the side of the road with a group of vultures. The crested caracaras eat live animals too, and snakes is one of their favorite diets. And the first caracara I ever saw was in a battle with a snake, and that was kind of a fascinating adventure to watch. The caracara won, but the snake was so heavy, the caracara had a hard time carrying that snake off. Animal behavior is fascinating. This is a common raven. And last year in March, this common raven was found gathering nesting materials in the park. The males typically bring the nesting material to the female, and then she crafts this cup-shaped nest. They live year-round in most of the western part of the US and way up into Canada. These ravens are several inches longer and wider than American crows, and they weigh over twice as much as a crow. Common ravens are usually seen one at a time or in pairs, whereas American crows sometimes fly in large groups. And their sound is different. The crow, I don't have a picture of a crow for you, but most people, I think, have some idea of what a crow looks like, maybe. The crow's sound is kind of a caw, caw, caw. And the raven's sound is a much raspier. They say it like it comes from the back of the throat. Caw, 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 which is not a very good rendition of it, but you get the idea. It's a raspier sound. Okay. Here's a red-shouldered hawk. We have two fairly common hawks in the park, and the red-shouldered is probably the most common. The obvious field marks that you would see on this bird are, you can sort of see that the tail has black and white striping on it. And they also do have reddish on the shoulders. If you see them from the back, you're not going to be able to see that in this photo, but from other angles, you'll see that pretty easily. A couple of years ago, a pair of them mated and had a nest near the historic old stone Volker farmstead on the Blanco side of the Blanco entrance side of the park. Now, I'm going to ask you to take a look. I'm going to go on and I'll show a Cooper's hawk, but take a look at the length of this tail in proportion to the body. It starts up here, but it's still a shorter tail than you're going to see on the Cooper's hawk, which is coming up next. Here I have a juvenile Cooper's hawk, and as they grow up, they look different at various stages. They're the same size as the adult, but the coloration of them changes as they're reaching maturity. And then over here, we've got the adult Cooper's hawk. And you can see here that the two species look kind of alike, except for the length of that tail. Look at that in proportion to its body. It's much longer than the red-shouldered hawk. And the red-shouldered hawk's back is a darker gray that's mottled with some white, and the Cooper's hawk, as you can see here, has a solid medium gray color on its back with very little white. They both kind of hunt in the same places. They're both about the same length, 16.5 to 17 inches. And the Coopers, one more thing on the Coopers, it has a gray cap on its head, and the head is kind of flatter than the red-shouldered hawks, and actually flatter than most of the hawks species. Now we're going to go into other birds that you're most likely to see in tree canopies and shrubs. So here's the American kestrel. It's all puffed up on a cold morning at the top of a tree in the savanna in the park. They're usually slimmer than this one looks, but puffing up those feathers offers it more insulation from the cold. The kestrel is the smallest falcon in North America. It's about the size of a cardinal. And you're most likely to see them in the top of a tree or on a utility wire along the roadside. They eat insects and rodents, as well as small birds and even small snakes. And like so many bird species, unfortunately, they are decreasing in number because of clearing of land that includes taking away the dead trees in which they nest in the cavities. Plus, many of their food types that they prefer are being killed off by pesticide use. Here's a barred owl, and they are with us year round, but we usually notice them only early in the winter when they call, especially in the night, looking for a mate. Their gravelly call sounds like, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all? So it's like, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all? Okay. Otherwise, they're very well camouflaged in the tree canopy, and you can easily pass right by them and never even notice. They're good-sized owls, 17 to 20 inches long, and slightly smaller than the great horned owl that I'll talk about next. These are mottled brown and white with dark eyes. Notice those eyes, because that's a distinctive factor for them versus the great horned owl. The barred owls eat smaller birds and smaller animals of all kinds, and unfortunately for some people, they do eat small pets. So you have to be careful if there's an owl around. Great horned owl. If this bird looks familiar to you, it's the one that most storybooks feature when an owl is part of the story. It has these ear-like tufts. Those are not the ears, they're just tufts. And they have yellow piercing eyes. Now you can't see the eyes on the adult here, but this is a parent and a baby owl in a nest that was along Salado Creek several years ago. And the adults have these yellow eyes also. So if you can see the eyes, the yellow-eyed with the tufts, that's likely to be in our area a great horned owl. They usually hunt for prey at night, but sometimes they'll do so in the daytime during the winter, especially. They eat all kinds of mammals and birds, as well as insects and snakes. And they usually come down on their prey from a perch somewhere, but every once in a while they'll land and stalk their prey on the ground. Here's the eastern phoebe. It's one of our quite regular visitors at Hardberger Park. And it's our area's most common bird in the flycatcher category. And it's with us year round, and it has a distinctive behavior that helps us recognize it. When it lands, it bobs its tail. It bobs its tail like this. And it almost always does that. So that's another good way to figure out that it is an eastern phoebe. They nest in the wild, but they also nest in neighborhoods. They really seem to have adapted well to humans being around. And in fact, when a phoebe pair nested high up in our neighbor's front porch several years ago, the parent birds would come over and follow Alan around as he mowed the lawn. And apparently they were hoping that he'd turn up some tasty morsel as the mower passed. And I actually did get to see, there's lots of stuff in our lawns and that we don't even realize is there. And I did see a couple of moths fly out, and they got to be some eastern phoebe's meal that day. Here's a house finch. They are native to the western part of the US, but they were introduced in the eastern part of the US as caged birds many, many years ago. And the escapees have populated themselves basically across the United States now. This photo is a male house finch. The female looks like a much different bird, but it actually has the same kind of coloration and striping, except it doesn't have the red coloring. There's really almost no red on the female. We often see groups of house finches, groups of them, a good sized groups of them, unless they're in the breeding season, and then they're paired off and you'll only see one or two at a time. They usually nest in and around, or they often nest in and around human-made structures. So we'll see them around in our neighborhoods. The northern cardinal, this is a male. Many people in San Antonio call this a red bird, and that's what I grew up calling it. Cardinals are with us here in San Antonio all year round. It's a seed eater, and it's often the first bird and the last bird of the day at our backyard feeders. The males are this brilliant red, and the mostly brown females have a crest on their head, like this one does, and they have some lovely red accents. But in general, they're duller than the males. The northern cardinal ranges from the central U.S. over a bit into Arizona and east into the eastern U.S. Here's a female bathing at the water feature here in the park. Water is not only good for drinking, but it's also good for taking baths. Birds need that. They must periodically bathe to clean their wings of dirt particles and other things that might weight them down. Birds are so light that anything that might add weight could affect their ability to fly swiftly to get away from possible predators. The blue jay is a strikingly colored blue, white, and black bird. Now, when I was a child here in San Antonio in the 1950s and 60s, we did not have blue jays here. They were mostly in the Houston area and east of there. In the ensuing years, though, the range for these birds has expanded to the west, and now they're here with us in San Antonio. Blue jays also gang up on owls and hawks that they don't like in their territory. So if sometime you're walking along, you hear a big ruckus up in the trees, look toward that sound and see what you can find, because you may find a blue jay or a group of blue jays harassing an owl or a hawk. Blue jays have a particular fondness for acorns, so many oak trees here in the park attract them. Also note this crest on the head. Sometimes it sticks up more. He's got it a little bit flattened, but he has a crest on his head. The blue jay is one of 4 birds in the park with a distinct crested head. Listed by size, they are the blue jay, which is 11 inches long, the northern cardinal that we just looked at, and that's 9 inches long. Coming up in the program, we'll have a cedar waxwing that's 7¼ inches long, and then the black crested titmouse at 6½ inches long. And we'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Now we're going to move on to the wrens that we see typically in the park. There are a couple of them. This is a Carolina wren that was singing his heart out one cool morning last year. The deep, rusty, reddish brown bird and that has a buffy colored breast. It's a prolific singer. It has a number of different tunes, many of which carry for a long way for such a small bird. The first time you see it, you think to yourself, could that little bird possibly be making that big noise? But both wrens make big noises. Many people have trouble distinguishing this from the Carolina wren, from the Buick's wren rather. And this one has that rusty red color, but the Buick's wren has more of a grayish color. And I want you to take a look at this Carolina wren's tail in proportion to its body. Now it's kind of at an angle, so the tail is actually a little longer than it looks here, but we're going to look at that versus the Buick wren's tail in just a second. But first I want to show you this photo. This is one of my favorite photos of last year. A Carolina wren pair built a nest and had babies in a Talavera pot in our backyard. And they were just so cute, I had to include it in this program. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Buick's wren. Here it is singing, and as you can see, it's not that rusty red. It's more of a grayish color actually. And then take a look at that tail. It's quite a bit longer in proportion to its body than the Carolina wren's is. And interestingly, they don't seem to be territorial with each other. We've had both species nest at the same time in our backyard. We're only a couple of miles from the park. And so it's sometimes they're only just a few feet from each other. So they don't seem to mind being in each other's territory. They're not really territorial as many other birds are. So now we're going to look at 3 woodpeckers that are pretty common in the park. This one is a golden fronted woodpecker. I wanted to show this in 2 different ways. It's about 9.5 inches long. It's the largest woodpecker that we see in Bexar County. And it's really a stunning looking bird. It's with us year round and nests here. In the left photo, it's on an old snag that was really close to the Wildscape demonstration garden. And it's upright in the way that we usually see them on the left. On the right, it's a golden fronted woodpecker also, but it's unusually bent over because it's trying to hold on to the ledge and catch a drop of water or two over at the bird water feature. And note how it's using its tail here to hold itself steady. It uses that almost like a third appendage, and that's really typical of woodpeckers in general. This bird's range includes most of the middle section of Texas. So if you have visitors coming from very far north of here, it'll be a really nice find for them. They will be awed by the golden fronted woodpecker. The ladder-backed woodpecker, here's a female. The male's going to have red on the head, has that laddering, black and white laddering on the back. And you can see how it's well camouflaged up against this tree bark. Here's a pair of downy woodpeckers. They're 6 3/4 inches long. They're only a little bit smaller than the ladderback. They have some laddering on their back, but you can tell it's a downy woodpecker because they've got these patches kind of along their back, along the spine. This photo was taken in our backyard last year, and we had a successful mating and nesting, and they had some nice babies that we got to watch grow up in this tree cavity. There's a black-chinned hummingbird. It is our most common summer hummer, as we say. In this photo, the morning light is hitting that chin or throat, so the feather in just the right way, so that iridescent purple throat or chin is visible. If the sun doesn't hit it right, this looks like an all black head on this bird. This one was coming to the nectar in the nectar at the red yucca plant at the Wildscape demonstration garden in the park. Now here's a Carolina chickadee. I love little sweet chickadees. We see them in the south half of the United States. They look a lot like the black-capped chickadee, which is north of us, but they are considered to be completely different species. They do have some very subtle coloration differences, as well as their song is slightly higher pitched and a little slower than the black-capped chickadee, but those are so subtle, it's hard to see the difference. And when all is said and done, we just need to know that if you see a chickadee here in San Antonio, it's almost definitely going to be a Carolina chickadee. There's a black crested titmouse. This bird can be seen in Texas and northeastern Mexico. At one time, it was thought to be a subspecies of the tufted titmouse that is found in a lot of the rest of the United States, but since then it has been declared a whole separate species. The main difference in appearance between it and the tufted titmouse is the black crested has a black crest. For once, they name a bird the right thing. It tells us something about it. It has this black crest, and the tufted titmouse has a gray colored crest. And here we often see the Carolina chickadees and black crested titmouses hanging around in mixed groups. They both eat insects and seeds. We often see them in the ball moss in our live oak trees, finding insects so small that we probably never would have even known those insects are there. And by the way, I'm going to make up, this is my promo for ball moss. It's an epiphyte. It won't hurt your trees. You may already know this, but I got to say it because it's important. It won't hurt your trees unless it covers so much of the tree that no light can get to the leaves. That ball moss offers all kinds of little insects that are a great food source, not only for chickadees and titmouses, but also for migrating warblers in the spring and the fall as they come through our area. So I really, really encourage you to leave the ball moss on your trees. Lesser goldfinch, this is a male. This is the smaller of the two goldfinches that we have here, and it stays with us all year round. The adult males have this striking black back and a bright yellow breast. And when they fly, they have a large white patch on their wing that you can see from below. Here, the lesser goldfinch is eating mealy blue sage seed in the butterfly-shaped raised bed located in front of the outdoor education building on the Blanco entrance side of the park. The American goldfinch comes to us only in the winter. And in the winter, they're in their dull, non-breeding plumage. So it's really kind of challenging sometimes to tell the difference between American goldfinches and the lesser goldfinch females, which are not as brilliant as the males. Right before the American goldfinches migrate north in the spring to their breeding grounds, the males begin to brighten into their bright yellow color with a black cap. And you can just see the black cap is just starting to appear here, right here on this bird. And it's yellowing up. It's a golden yellow. And just when they're the prettiest, boom, they're gone. And then they come back and visit us next year. So both of these goldfinches are truly seed eaters and are fairly easy to attract to backyard feeders with fresh thistle and Niger seed. Those two kinds of seed have a really high oil content, but it also means that oil content, with an oil content so high that can go rancid. So if you see they're not eating your seeds, something's wrong with your seed. Best always to get fresh seed when you're putting stuff in your feeders. In the wild, they eat many different kinds of seed, but if there are thistle plants nearby that have gone to seed, as happens in the park, watch for goldfinches because they're likely to be around in good numbers then chowing down on the seed. There's a chipping sparrow. We're moving into the sparrows. Some people call these chippies, but they're chipping sparrows. They generally spend only the winter with us and they breed farther north. The rusty colored head in the non-breeding chippies is not quite as bright as when they're in their breeding areas in the spring and summer. In general, sparrows, basically, in general, are often difficult to identify. But if you see one that has this dark eye stripe that goes from the bill kind of through the eye and to the back of the head, it's likely that what you're looking at is a chipping sparrow. And here's a Vesper Sparrow. I love this little photo. It's one of our winter visitors, and it has a brown streaked breast, and you can see that white eye ring here in this photo. And when it flies, you see flashes of white on both sides of the tail, and that means that it has a solid white feather on either side of the tail. But I love the way I was gawking at him, and he was gawking at me, this little bird. It's fun to take a picture like that. Here's a Loggerhead Shrike. The Loggerhead Shrike eats insects, but it also eats small birds and lizards and small mammals. It's sometimes called the butcher bird because it often skewers the prey on thorns or barbed wire to make the food easier to eat. And sometimes it actually keeps food stored there until it gets hungry again. So if you see an insect skewered on a thorn or on some barbed wire, there's probably a Loggerhead Shrike in the area. You'll frequently see them sitting atop the tallest tree, like in this photo, in the park's savanna area to get a good view of what food might be in its territory. The most distinctive aspect of the Loggerhead Shrike's appearance is this black mask on the top of its head in this photo. Because of the coloration, sometimes people think it's a mockingbird, but this black mask is characteristic. And here's the mockingbird. You see it has a stripe, but it has no dark mask like that. The northern mockingbird is our Texas state bird, and it's also the state bird for 4 other southern states in the US, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi, and Tennessee. We do see a lot of juveniles around the park, so it's good to know that they are successfully nesting here. And I have to have one more picture of a northern mockingbird. I found this one eating some of the last of the berries on the flame leaf sumac in the Wildscape demonstration garden a couple of years ago. In the winter, berries are its main food source, and I've seen them eating berries from beautyberry bushes and also hackberry trees. I'm sure they eat berries from a lot of other things too. This is a ruby-crowned kinglet. This small bird flits around in trees and shrubs and flutters its wings, searching for spiders and gnats and the like. It's a gray-green color with a partial eye ring here. Sometimes it looks like even more of an eye ring. and it has one full bar on the wing and a little partial bar on the wing. The ruby crown for which it's named is something that we rarely get to see. Some people think that they flare that ruby crown when they're being aggressive, or else they're showing off for lady ruby crown kinglets. But we just don't see it very often. And because they move fast and rarely stay in the same place for very long, they're very challenging to photograph. This photo is the best one I've ever been able to get of one. I've gotten many where it was just the tail of the bird that the bird's on its way, and I'm still trying to take a picture. Okay, golden crowned kinglets. In our area, we usually have more ruby crowned kinglets than golden crowned, but we have been seeing several golden crowns around this year, and that's kind of fun. This one was over by the wetland on the Northwest Military side of the park earlier this year. Yeah, I think it was January. It might have been December, but I think it was January. Both species hang out kind of in the same area, probably because they eat the same kinds of foods. The golden crowned kinglet looks a lot like the ruby crowned, except that it has black and white striping on its face. Barely larger than a hummingbird, these little birds are with us during the non-breeding season, and they go north into the Midwest of the United States and into Canada to mate and raise their families. Here's a white-eyed Varian. Now this one's a juvenile. He's still a little fluffy, and when they turn into adults, their feathers are much smoother. But he's just old enough for his eye to have turned white. When they're first born, their eye is not white. You're more likely to hear white-eyed vireos call in the thick woods and be unable to see them. Some people describe their call as spit, see if I care, spit. So it kind of goes, see if I care, spit. So there's always that little at the end. There have been times when we've heard them 5 or 6 times on a bird survey at Hardberger Park and have failed to see any of them. So this bird is one for which you'll want to learn the call. And if you hear the call, put your binocs. There's one case where you don't see the bird first. Put your binocs up in the area where you think you're hearing the call, and you might get a good look at it. These birds are very secretive. They're very well camouflaged down in the bush. Here's a summer tanager male. These are gorgeous birds. Unlike the migrating birds that I'm talking about that spend only the winter with us and just fly through, or maybe just fly through during migration, summer tanagers actually join us in the spring for their mating season. Many people see this bird and think that it's a northern cardinal, but the red on the male summer tanager is more strawberry colored, like you see in this bird, and it has no crest. The female summer tanager is kind of a mustard yellow, which makes the bird much more challenging to see amongst the trees. This one stands out, the male here, in that color. Their favorite food is bees and wasps. And here is a summer tanager juvenile male that one year was coming to our feeders to get the suet. And you can see he's really mottled coloring, and he's trying to get red, but he'll be red. As time went on, he got redder and redder and redder. But that was fun to see the juvenile. And here's a black and white warbler right here. It's the only warbler that we have that is all black and white. The bird range maps show that this species comes through here only on migration. But the truth of it is that we have a few black and white warblers here in the winter every year. For those who go down to the Judson Nature, this one was at the Bird Water feature here in the park. But if you go down to the Judson Nature Center in Alamo Heights, there usually is a black and white warbler hanging around down there during the winter. Several winters we've seen it there. And this is a yellow rumped warbler. It's one of the largest of our warblers at 5.5 inches long. You can see the yellow spot in this picture. Underneath each wing, there's a yellow spot. And on that rear end, there's a yellow spot. And so because of that rear end yellow spot, a lot of people call it a butterbutt. So sometimes I can't think of the yellow rumped warbler, but I always remember to call it a butterbutt. Last January, a year ago, we saw a good-sized group of maybe 12 to 15 of these down in Acequia Park along the Mission Reach at the San Antonio River. We see them at Hardberger Park routinely too. At Acequia, they were eating some kinds of bugs in the native pecan trees in the picnic area. And we often see them eating bugs in the live oak trees at Hardberger Park. And here's one of the few warblers that spends the winter with us. And it's all the orange-crowned warbler. It's also often described as having drab plumage, but it is a pretty little bird. If you look closely, you'll see some really light streaking on the breast, but that's difficult to see from any distance. And it has a little bit of yellowish under the tail. That's called the undertail covert. The orange crown for which it's named is hardly ever visible. Now I want to talk about some unusual warblers that we've found that we see in Hardberger Park. Alan showed this picture earlier, the yellow-throated warbler. This bird spends the winter along the Texas coast and far south in the valley in Texas. We only see it during migration as it flies north and east to breed. This yellow-throated warbler made an appearance in the fall of 2020 when we had not had any recent rain. Now, little ponds of water were hard to find then, and during migration, all birds need not only food, but water too. So he was probably paying a visit to the water feature, although it was seen in the trees close to the water feature. The bay-breasted warbler, 2021 was the first year for a documented sighting of the bay-breasted warbler in Phil Hardberger Park. This bird is seen in our area only during migration as it travels from Central and South America to Canada and back. So it was a quite unusual sighting here in San Antonio in the park. In Canada, they usually eat spruce budworms, and they can devour thousands of them in the course of only a month when they're raising their babies and trying to get protein for their babies. In the non-breeding season, they consume more fruits and insects. Here's a golden-cheeked warbler. Several years ago, very near the outdoor classroom on the Blanco entrance side of the park, Wendy Leonard spied a golden-cheeked warbler in migration. Wendy was a park naturalist at that time and now is a nature preserve officer with San Antonio Parks and Recreation. One of her parks is Hardberger Park. This bird is deemed rare and endangered. And as you all know, as you may know, golden-cheeked warblers breed in the Texas Hill Country, and that's the only place where they breed. It was just passing through in migration. They do not breed in the park that we are aware of. The closest breeding area we know about would be Eisenhower Park or Camp Bullis in northern Bexar County. They also nest in Friedrich Park too. So this bird was probably on its way to one of those places or on its way to nest in the hill country. Now we're going to move along to a few birds that we might see in the underbrush. Here's the hermit thrush. This breeds mostly in the western part of the US and into Canada, but it spends its winters with us. Grayish overall, has kind of a reddish tail with this smudged spotting on the breast. This photo is in focus, but the smudged spotting is smudgy. Although it occasionally pops up in the trees, it spends most of its time in the dense understory foraging on the ground. They mainly eat insects, but often they vary their diet in the winter to include wild berries. And here's a veery. We see veeries here only in migration as they fly to and from Central South America to their breeding grounds in the far northern part of the US and into Canada. They usually hang around near the ground. Note the rusty red tail, and you can kind of see it's on the back, and the rusty spotting, smudgy spotting on the upper breast. You can see how that bird blends in well with the leaf litter on the ground, so they're really hard to see unless they jump up a little bit. 2021 brought the first documented sighting of a veery in Phil Hardberger Park, and it was done by one of San Antonio's young birders who was patient enough to get this photo, and I really appreciate him allowing to use his photo. Here's a spotted towhee. We rarely get to see this bird because, once again, it spends most of its time down in the leaf litter. It's rufous and black and white coloration blends in nicely with the leaves. if you're walking along and you hear something, a rustling noise down on the ground, look down, because it could easily be one of these birds or some of these other birds that spend their life mostly in the leaf litter. If you're really, really lucky, you're going to see this towhee when it jumps up from the undergrowth to see what's going on up top. And I was lucky enough to see this bird doing just basically that. Now I'm going to end with three birds that mainly stay on or near the ground. They do fly, you know, they have wings and they use them, but they are a lot of times on the ground. We often see actually white-winged doves, and I'll show some of those in overhead groups too. First, I'm going to talk about the mourning dove. Sometimes this bird is confused with white-winged doves, which is a little more common here, but the two species are about the same size. The mourning dove tail is long and tapered and ends pretty much in a point. And also it has these black spots right here on the wings. Last fall, there was a mourning dove that that walked around the trails in the Wildscape Demonstration Garden almost daily for a while, quietly roaming around on the ground, looking for any remaining seeds from the annual wildflower plants last year. And here's the white-winged dove. Here's why it's called white-winged, because there's this white on the edge of the wing. Some of you may know people who hunt them. They are considered a game dove in Texas. You can see that the wings don't have those spots that the mourning dove had. And you can also see here that the tail is kind of blunt at the end. It's not a pointy thing like the mourning doves. And here's the other dove that we're likely to see here, although it's not nearly as common as the first two that I showed. It's the smallest dove that we have generally here. It's 8.5 inches long. It's usually seen in groups of 3 to 10 and on the ground. They almost exclusively eat seeds and grains of anything from grasses to shrubs. And they're with us year round. And sometimes if you have a ground or platform feeder at your house, they'll come to that. The last bird I'm going to show you here is the greater roadrunner. You can't show a presentation about birds of Hardberger Park unless you show a roadrunner, a greater roadrunner. This one was prancing around in the Wildscape Demonstration Garden outside of the metal fence, carrying a lizard in his mouth, which I thought really looked odd to me. I thought, well, if he's got some food, why doesn't he leave with it? And then a female came running out from the inside of the metal fence, and they ran off together. And that's when I figured out that I had encountered some kind of mating behavior that was going on. And we have a lot of lizards in the garden during the summer. And so it became the HEB for this pair of greater roadrunners last year as they raised their family. And I'm guessing that their nest was nearby because we saw them with some regularity. Now, I'm finished with the birds, but I'm going to leave you with a very concerning thought. Beware of becoming interested in birds, because for many people, birds are the gateway animal to other pretty flying things called butterflies. And once you get started on birds and flying creatures, you're going to find out there are other very pretty flying creatures too, butterflies. But that's another program. In the meantime, there's a poster of some butterflies that we've seen in the Wildscape Demonstration Garden on the kiosk at the where the trails cross near the Wildscape Demonstration Garden. So you can take a look at the butterflies there. Now you've heard Alan's part of the program about the tools for birding, and now you've seen some photos of the more common birds at Phil Hardberger Park and a few that are not as common. And I am going to, oh yes, I need to tell you, we have a resource page for you. And you can either, I'm going to leave this up for a minute or two, and then we'll go off of it. But we'll also have this posted. The Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy website is going to have this posted for us, and it'll be attached to a video, or it'll be with a video of this presentation. So if you want to look some things up, there's lots of research you can do there and reading. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave my screen share on, David, for a few minutes, but if people have questions, we'd be glad to try to answer them. We were billed as expert birders, and I have to tell you, we do not consider ourselves to be expert birders. but we are enthusiastic birders, and we are still learning about birds all the time. So if we don't know the answer, we might have some place to send you to get the answer, but we'll certainly try to answer any questions you have. So David.
Yes, so we have had a few questions in the chat and also a couple also comments. Wendy mentioned that they've seen turkeys several times in the park. And I know that a while ago there were actually some raised on the Volker homestead. So that would be cool. I hope I see one. Another comment is about the water feature. So the water feature that's been in several of the photos is located on the Blanco side of the park. So if you enter from Blanco, our parking lot is kind of like a rectangle, and there's a small building where the restrooms and our outdoor classroom is located. And there's a wall to the right, almost on the side closer to Blanco Road. And it's a wooden wall with windows that you can walk up to and observe the water feature. And it's really cool piece of the park because I've seen all kinds of wildlife at this water feature. I've seen a handful of different birds, but I've also seen the deer using the feature. And a couple of weeks ago, I saw an armadillo walking around the water feature. And so that was really great just to see the wildlife interacting with that. Another question we had is, have y'all or do we see in local data a decrease in diversity or quantity that's been talked about in some nature literature?
I'll take a shot at that. I guess I, like everybody else, it just seems like there's fewer birds and both species and individuals than there used to be, although I have not done any particular studies of the numbers to actually confirm that. As far as in the park is concerned, we're actually getting more birds that have been sighted. Every year we update that list of birds in the park, and every year it goes up by 2 or 3. And I think that happens for a couple of reasons. One, it's becoming more of a birding area, so there's more people out there. And two, the area that they turned into a savanna, we've got a lot of sparrows there that were not there when it was a mesquite scrub.
Okay. Well, another pseudo-related question. Well, there's a couple questions about seasons and times of year. What months are the regular breeding seasons for the common birds in our area?
Some of them breed really early. The bigger birds in particular, the owls and hawks, tend to have their nests going in January and February. And then the breeding season actually goes on the summer, spring and summer. Spring, I guess you'd say, would be the biggest breeding season, but then they're raising their babies all into the summer. So I'd say probably by September, most of the breeding is done. Some of the wrens will, well, not just wrens, other birds have 2 sets of nests in a breeding season. We had some crazy wrens that tried to have 3 nests, and it's like, give it up, you know. It gets really hot. You know, they nest in these little cavities. We have some that nest in a decorative gourd, and my gosh, it's just, you know, when it's 105, they lost a whole set of babies once because it just got too hot in there. So anyhow, I hope that answers the question.
Also related, are there certain times of the year where we're more likely to see a bigger variety of birds, or when might be the best month to kind of get your feet wet with birding?
Peak migration is in April, May. And so that's the time when you'll see, in early April, you might still be seeing the winter birds, the sparrows, etc. They go away, migrating birds come through, and then and then the summer residents show up. So I'd probably say the peak time is probably April to June.
Well, that works out great because I'll mention it in a little bit, but we are going to have a beginning birding program, so an opportunity to come out one Friday morning. But I'll talk about that later. Another question is, what sort of native plants might you incorporate into a garden to specifically support birds?
Wow. A variety. Plants that have berries, plants that have seeds, plants that offer a place for the birds to build a nest. So most of the natives that you can find many of the natives that you find have uses for birds and other animals that are native to the area. If you come out to the demonstration garden, we have a lot of our plants labeled, and you can see what they are and what they provide to wildlife. There's really any native plant has some virtue to it for animals, some animal or another, and sometimes many animals. In fact, Judith Green with Texas Parks and Wildlife says that the native plant that provides the most to the most animals is a hackberry tree. And most people are busy cutting down hackberry trees. They think they're trash trees. And the birds drop the seeds over the side of the fence, and then the tree comes up in the fence, and next thing you know, your fence is falling over, and whatever. But those trees are really good for all kinds of animals. For nesting for birds, they build a lot of nests in there. They have some great berries. Butterflies, some butterflies use the hackberry as host plants. I mean, there's a lot of stuff a lot of native animals that get good stuff from a hackberry. That's my plug for a hackberry.
Well, so those actually tie into two of our upcoming nature walks. So this nature walk became a nature talk, and good because the weather was very unpleasant today. But in March, we have a nature walk talking about the trees of Phil Hardberger Park. So I know we're going to touch on that one. And then in June, we're going to have a nature walk talking about native plants. So those are things to look forward to. Gail asked, will there be birding classes and events offered during the weekends? So we do have coming up in, I think also in June, we have a family and children birding program. So that'll be up on the calendar in a couple months. And we are looking for future opportunities to bring more birding programs to the park, because I know that's something that I'm interested in, and definitely Alan and Patsy are interested in. So just keep an eye on our calendar for programs like that as they come along. Do we have any other questions for Alan and Patsy? So we have a question, how could we get involved with these programs? So the best way to get involved is to, number one, keep an eye on our calendar. So if you visit philhardbergerpark.org, there's a link to our calendar, and that'll give you a list of the upcoming programs for that month. But this program is in partnership with the Bexar County Audubon Society and the San Antonio Audubon Society. So those are two organizations where if you're passionate about birding, they're definitely worth looking into. And I think Alan and Patsy can give us more information about that. We also have the Alamo Area Master Naturalist Program that we partner with for a lot of our programs. And it's a fantastic program to just invest in your own knowledge related to our natural areas and our wildlife and nature here in San Antonio and Texas. So there's all of those opportunities. And if you are interested in volunteering for any of our programs, then you can email me. I'm David. And our information is on our website of ways that you can get involved that way as well. Well, if there's no more questions in the chat, oh, thank you, Wendy. So we do have really great information on our website. So if you visit the Hardberger Park, we have links to our Talking Point series, which has just an amazing plethora of information about various nature topics, including bird materials. We also have children's birding materials. You'll have to poke around a little bit on our website, but we have our Starting Out Wild and our Growing Up Wild programs. So there's a lot of ways to kind of get started with our nature information through our website. One more thing I did want to mention. So again, our program is supported by all of those amazing organizations, as well as the Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy. And it is a donation and member supported organization. So if you're interested in supporting, there's ways to donate on our website, and you can also look at becoming a member. For March, we have a few really great programs I'd like to mention. On the first Saturday, so March 5th, we're going to have a family guided hike and bug program. So after we walk to the land bridge and back, I'm going to talk about bugs in our classroom and different ways to identify different arthropods. On March 11th, which is a Friday evening, we're going to have a night prowl where we'll get to go out with Jewel, our park naturalist, and observe wildlife at dusk. On Saturday the 12th, we're going to have grab and go nature kits talking about symbiosis. And so those are information packets for children. On the 19th, Saturday, we're going to have a presentation at our Butterfly Learning Center about rain gardens and ways to bring native plants into your own garden to make the most of excess runoff. And then we're going to end March with our in-person nature walk, talking about the trees in our park. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us this Saturday. Thank you so much, Alan and Patsy. Those photos are amazing. I'm probably going to ask you to look at them again later. I didn't even know there were that many birds in the park. I've seen maybe a handful that I can identify, but that's a lot more that I'm going to be looking out for now.
David, the list now is what, Alan, up to 166 species that have been seen in Hardberger Park. And the link for that list is on that resource page.
Okay. And yes, we will have the resource page on our website by Monday. So look for that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. And I hope y'all have a good weekend and try to stay warm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.